Boston, early winter. The air outside shimmered with cold, the kind that turned breath into ghosts and made people hurry into warmth. Inside Café Verona, the smell of roasted beans and caramelized sugar filled the space, mingling with the quiet murmur of conversations. At a corner table by the window sat Alexander Reed, 35, a white billionaire whose name had become synonymous with innovation in smart technology. The man who'd redefined how the world connected, yet somehow never managed to connect with anyone. He was the kind of presence that drew stares, tailored black coat, sharp jawline eyes, a shade of cold steel that could cut through any room. Yet those same eyes carried a weariness that money couldn't mask. His friend Henry Collins slouched opposite him, stirring his espresso lazily. "You've got it all, Alex Wealth Power looks, but not one woman to share your penthouse with. Don't tell me you're waiting for a software update to fix your heart." Henry smirked, his tone dripping with mockery. Alexander's lips curved into a faint, detached smile. "Love is overrated," he replied coolly. "It's an emotional bug people refuse to patch." Henry chuckled, leaning forward. "Spoken like a true machine. But come on, man, you're 35. Don't you ever feel—" Lonely, Alexander took a sip of his black coffee. No sugar, no cream, no warmth. "Loneliness is a luxury," he said simply. "No one can betray you when you're alone." Henry's laughter echoed through the cafe, catching the attention of nearby tables. "God, you sound like a press release. Admit it, you're scared. Scared of falling again." The words hit harder than Alexander let on. His mind flickered a woman's voice from years ago, trembling with anger. "You'll never be enough, Alex. Not for love, not for life." The memory tasted like burnt coffee. He placed his cup down, his patience thinning. "You think I'm scared? I think—" Henry said, smirking. "You're incapable of feeling. You treat women like mergers profitable or pointless." A sharp silence followed. Then Alexander leaned back, his tone dangerously calm. "All right. You want proof?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Alexander's eyes shifted toward the entrance where the wind rattled the glass door. Then he said it slowly, carelessly, like a man tossing a match into gasoline. "The next woman who walks into this cafe, I'll marry her." Henry's jaw dropped before bursting into laughter. "You, Alexander Reed, the almighty CEO of Reed Technologies, marrying a random stranger, that's rich." Alexander smirked. 5% of my company. "Henry, that's what you'll get if I don't follow through." The laughter stopped. Henry's eyes gleamed, greed and curiosity dancing together. 5%. "Are you serious?" Alexander leaned forward, voice like ice. Dead serious. A few heads turned toward them now, sensing tension. Henry extended his hand with a grin. "Deal." They shook on it. The sound of their palms meeting echoed faintly, like fate sealing its own cruel joke. Seconds later, the cafe door swung open, and silence fell. A gust of cold air swept in, followed by the faint sound of chimes. Everyone turned. Standing there was a woman, Naomi Carter, 29, African-American, wearing a faded brown coat, too thin for the weather, and a wool hat slightly askew. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, and her figure was soft, fuller than what the glossy magazines worshipped. In her hands, a torn paper bag carried a single cupcake box. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Henry blinked, then snorted. "Oh, this is perfect." Alexander froze. He hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined her. She wasn't the type of woman his world applauded. No designer labels, no curated beauty. Just an ordinary woman who looked like she'd walked out of a different life, one untouched by money or pretense. Henry whispered, amused, Still want to go through with it, lover boy? Alexander's pride ignited. The challenge burned hotter than logic. He stood up. Henry's eyes widened. You can't be serious. But Alexander didn't respond. He adjusted his coat, his heartbeat oddly unsteady, and walked toward her. Every step echoed like a countdown. Naomi glanced up just as he stopped in front of her. Their eyes met hers, warm and confused, his cold and unreadable. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Could you move aside? I'm just trying to, I'll marry you." Alexander interrupted. The cafe erupted in laughter. Naomi blinked, stunned. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," he replied, voice steady. "I'll marry you?" She stared at him, this stranger in a $1,000 coat, speaking nonsense in front of dozens of people. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. Henry called out from the corner, laughing. "It's a bet, sweetheart. Don't take it personally." The words hit Naomi like a slap. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as murmurs filled the cafe, whispers about her size, her looks, her skin. She clenched the paper bag tighter. Her voice trembled, but her pride didn't waver. "You rich men think everything's a game, don't you?" she said quietly. "But people aren't toys. Not me." She turned and walked out. The laughter followed her like smoke. Alexander stood frozen, watching her disappear into the gray winter outside. His chest felt strangely heavy, a weight that hadn't been there moments ago. For the first time in years, he couldn't explain what he felt. Henry raised his cup mockingly. "Well, that was quick. Guess I'll take that 5%. But Alexander didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the door, the faint imprint of Naomi's voice still hanging in the air. Hours later, he sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the Charles River. The city glimmered beneath him, a sea of lights cold and distant. Yet in his mind, all he saw was her face. That mix of shocked defiance and quiet pain. He should have laughed it off, should have forgotten, but he couldn't. Something about her, the way she looked at him, like he was the ridiculous one, unsettled him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the city's reflection. "People aren't toys." The words echoed again. He'd built empires, conquered markets, broken competitors. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, Alexander Reed couldn't conquer silence. He glanced at the clock, midnight. Then, almost without realizing it, he opened his laptop and searched the cafe's name. A receipt. A name on the order list from earlier that day, Naomi Carter. He whispered it once, the syllables soft, almost foreign on his tongue. Naomi Carter. Somewhere deep down something flickered, not quite guilt, not quite curiosity, maybe both. Across town, Naomi sat in her small apartment above Sweet Crumb's bakery, wiping away the last tear she hadn't meant to shed. She told herself she didn't care that she'd dealt with worse. But the truth stung. She'd walked into that cafe for a latte, hoping to warm herself before her shift. She didn't expect to walk out feeling humiliated in front of strangers. Her phone buzzed a text from her friend and coworker Mariah. "You okay?" "Heard what happened at Verona. People can be cruel." Naomi exhaled shakily, typing back, "I'm fine, just tired." She looked around the room, the boxes of flour, the smell of sugar and cinnamon clinging to everything. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Still, she couldn't shake his face, the billionaire who'd looked at her like she wasn't invisible, like she was a mirror he didn't want to look into. The next morning, headlines began to appear across Boston's gossip threads. Billionaire Alexander Reed makes shocking public marriage declaration at Café Verona. Some called it a stunt, others a meltdown. None knew the truth, that he was already on his way to the small bakery on the edge of town, searching for a woman who'd walked out before he could say sorry. Because for reasons he didn't yet understand, he wasn't ready to let her go. Sometimes a foolish bet can change the course of a life. Stay with this story because what begins as pride might just turn into the most unexpected kind of love. Naomi didn't expect to see him again. She'd convinced herself that the stranger in the cafe, the arrogant man who humiliated her in front of everyone, was just another rich fool she'd forget by morning. But some wounds had a way of lingering longer than pride allowed. 2 days later, she was at the bakery early icing cupcakes before the city woke up. The morning light streamed through the window, catching flecks of sugar in the air. Everything smelled like vanilla and burnt caramel familiar safe, until a shadow fell across the glass door. She didn't look up right away, but when she finally did, her heart stuttered. He was there. Alexander Reed stood outside the bakery, dressed in a charcoal coat, his hands buried in his pockets. His presence felt out of place against the chipped paint and pastel curtains. Naomi's stomach twisted. "Oh, no," she whispered to herself. Mariah. Her co-worker peeked out from the kitchen. "Who's that?" "No one," Naomi said quickly, but it was too late. Alexander had already stepped inside. The bell chimed softly as he entered. The room seemed smaller somehow, the air heavier. Naomi straightened, gripping the counter as he approached. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She froze. "What?" He met her gaze, steady, unguarded this time. "I came to apologize. What I did was unacceptable." Naomi let out a dry laugh. "You think a few words fix what you did?" "No," he admitted, "but it's a start." She crossed her arms. "Why even bother? You don't strike me as the type to lose sleep over someone like me." His expression flickered an imperceptible wound. "You'd be surprised." Naomi turned away, trying to ignore the strange pull his voice carried. "I have work to do. Please leave." But he didn't. Instead, he glanced at the cupcakes lined neatly on the display, each one imperfect, but beautiful in its own way. "You made these?" "Yes," she said shortly. "They're different." "Different?" He hesitated, then offered a faint smile. "They don't look perfect, but they feel real." Her jaw tightened. Real doesn't sell, Mr. Reed. People want pretty things, even if they taste fake. Something in her tone caught him off guard, a hint of exhaustion, maybe pain. For a moment, he didn't see the woman from the cafe. He saw someone fighting to be seen in a world that only valued appearances. "I'd like to buy one," he said finally. Naomi sighed, grabbing a box. "Fine. Which one?" He pointed at a crooked chocolate cupcake with uneven frosting. "That one." She boxed it up, slid it across the counter, and said, "That'll be $3. He placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. Naomi frowned. "I don't have change." "Keep it. I don't want your money." "Then consider it an apology," he said softly. Her hand froze on the box. For a second, something flickered between them, an uneasy quiet filled with questions neither dared ask. Then Mariah burst from the kitchen, breaking the tension. "Wait, you're that Alexander Reed, aren't you? The one from the news. The cafe bet guy." Naomi's face paled. "Mariah." But Alexander didn't flinch. "Yes," he said simply. "That's me." The girl's eyes widened. "So, was it true? Are you really going to marry the next woman who walked in?" Naomi's voice shook with disbelief. "You told the whole world about that." Alexander exhaled. It wasn't meant to become public. "Oh, right," she snapped. because humiliating me privately would have been so much better. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did, she said, her tone sharp as glass. And you don't get to rewrite that. She turned away, wiping invisible crumbs from the counter just to have something to do. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tapping of rain outside. Then Alexander said quietly, "Give me a chance to make it right." Naomi looked up, disbelief clouding her features. "Make it right? You don't even know me." "Then let me," he replied. Her laugh was soft bitter. "You think you can just walk into someone's life and fix what your ego broke?" "No," he said, his voice dropping lower. "But I want to understand why it broke me too." Something in his honesty disarmed her. She searched his eyes for mockery but found none. Only confusion and something that looked dangerously close to sincerity. "Fine," she said finally, her tone clipped. "You can start by leaving me alone." He didn't argue. He only nodded once quietly and walked out. The door closed behind him with a faint click, leaving Naomi standing there, her chest tight. Mariah peeked from behind the kitchen wall. "Girl, what was that?" Naomi shook her head. "A mistake that doesn't know when to stop following me." Outside, Alexander stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching the gray drizzle coat the city. He should have felt relief. It was over, his apology delivered. But something gnawed at him, a restlessness he hadn't felt in years. He'd built his empire on control. Every move calculated, every risk measured. But this woman, this stranger, had undone him with a single look of disappointment. He glanced back at the bakery window. Naomi was laughing now, saying something to her friend, her expression soft again. For a fleeting moment, she looked radiant, not because of her smile, but because it was real. And he realized how long it had been since he'd seen something real. The next morning, Naomi found another box, waiting outside the bakery door. Inside was a bouquet of lavender and a handwritten note on thick paper. "You said real doesn't sell. Maybe that's what's wrong with the world. A.R." She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or throw it away. Instead, she left it on the counter. Throughout the day, she told herself she didn't care, that she wouldn't be one of those women who fell for pretty apologies wrapped in money and charm. But when the doorbell chimed that afternoon and Alexander walked in again, rain dripping from his hair, something inside her shifted. He smiled faintly, holding a coffee cup in his hand. "You never told me how you like your latte." Naomi hesitated, unsure whether to laugh or throw him out. But somehow, against her better judgment, she reached for a second cup. "Fine," she muttered. "Just this once." He nodded, sitting quietly across from her as she poured the milk. The silence between them wasn't awkward this time. It was alive, pulsing with something neither wanted to name yet. Outside, the rain began to fall harder. Inside, for the first time since the bet, Alexander Reed didn't feel like a man proving a point. He felt like a man starting to lose control of his heart. For days after that unexpected coffee, Alexander found himself drifting back to Sweet Crumb's bakery. Sometimes he bought something, sometimes he didn't. He'd sit by the corner window silent, pretending to check his phone while Naomi worked behind the counter, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, face calm yet guarded. She didn't talk much to him, not at first. Every polite exchange between them was a tightrope. Her words measured, his attempts careful. But slowly, like winter melting into reluctant spring, something began to thaw. The man who used to command boardrooms now found himself lingering over the scent of vanilla and the sound of her laugh. One morning, as she arranged a tray of pastries, he asked quietly, Why baking? Naomi glanced up suspicious. Why technology? He smiled. Touché. But I'm serious. She shrugged, eyes focused on the tray. Because baking makes sense. You follow the recipe, measure the ingredients, and something good comes out, most of the time. Most of the time. Sometimes even when you do everything right, the cake still sinks. He tilted his head, studying her. And you keep trying anyway. Her smile was faint, but sincere. Of course, some things are worth a second chance. Her words lingered longer than she realized. Later that day, as Alexander left the bakery, he couldn't help but think about her metaphor. Some things are worth a second chance. It hit him harder than he wanted to admit. That evening, Henry showed up uninvited at his penthouse. The lights of Boston stretched endlessly behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, but Henry's grin was sharp enough to slice through it. So Henry began dropping his coat on the sofa. I hear you've been spending quite a lot of time at that little bakery. Alexander didn't look up from his laptop. Do you have a point? My point, Henry said, pacing, is that this whole thing started as a joke. And now it's turning into… What? A hobby, a rescue mission. Alexander's tone hardened. I don't owe you an explanation. Oh, you don't. Henry said, his smirk widening. But the board might think differently. Imagine the headlines: Billionaire CEO throws away business reputation for a woman who sells cupcakes. Alexander's jaw tightened. Careful, Henry. Henry chuckled. I'm just saying, read, not everything can be bought or saved. Alexander's glare cut the air. You're right, he said finally, voice low. Some things you fight for. Henry paused, startled by the conviction in his tone. Then he laughed, shaking his head. You're losing it, man. But Alexander didn't answer. His mind was already elsewhere on the way. Naomi's eyes softened when she smiled, the way her words always seemed to reach past his armor. Days later, Naomi found a small box left at the bakery door. Inside was a handwritten card and a dress, midnight blue, simple but elegant. The note read, You once said, the world only values what looks perfect. I'd like to prove you wrong. Dinner tonight. 7 p.m. No name. But she didn't need one. She almost threw the box away. Almost. But something in her refused to. That evening she stood in front of her mirror, staring at the reflection that had always been her harshest critic. The dress fit perfectly, not to hide, not to impress, but to be. For once she didn't feel like she had to shrink herself to fit into someone else's world. When she arrived at the restaurant, Alexander was waiting by the window, his usual calm replaced by something uncertain. He stood when he saw her, momentarily stunned. You look… He hesitated, searching for a word that wasn't shallow. Like yourself. Naomi smiled faintly. That's the point. Dinner was surprisingly quiet at first. No grand gestures, no arrogance. He asked about her favorite books, her childhood summers, what she dreamed of when no one was watching. She answered carefully, half expecting a punchline that never came. When dessert arrived, she pushed her plate away and said softly, Why are you really doing this? He looked up. Doing what? This. She gestured between them. Showing up, saying sorry, pretending this means something. I'm not pretending, he said, voice steady. She leaned back, crossing her arms. You don't even know me. Then help me, he replied. Help me understand what I missed that day. Naomi's expression softened, though she tried to hide it. You missed a chance to treat someone with respect. He nodded slowly. And now, I'm asking for one. There was a long silence, the kind that held more emotion than words ever could. Finally, she said quietly, You can't fix what happened with dinners or dresses, I'm not trying to fix it, he murmured. I just don't want it to be where our story ends. She froze at the word story. No one had ever said it like that before, as if what happened between them might actually matter. For the first time, she didn't see the billionaire everyone talked about. She saw a man, trying awkwardly, imperfectly, to be human again. Outside, the night was cold and quiet. When he offered to walk her home, she didn't refuse. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and blue, the sound of distant jazz spilling from a bar nearby. As they reached the corner near her street, she stopped. You don't have to follow me this far. He nodded. I know. But he didn't move. Naomi turned to him, her tone gentle but firm. You think life is something you can plan, control, or buy. But you can't. I know that now. Do you? She asked softly. Because if this is just about proving something to yourself or to him, then you're wasting both our time. Alexander met her eyes, and for once there was no pride left in his gaze, only quiet honesty. It's not about a bet anymore. Her breath caught. For a brief, terrifying second, she almost believed him. Then she smiled faintly, stepping back. Good night, Alexander. He watched her walk away, her figure fading into the soft glow of the streetlights. And somewhere inside him, something cracked open, something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Alexander Reed wanted to be seen, not for his name, but for the man he was trying to become. And he knew deep down that she was the only one who ever had. The days turned into weeks, and what began as an awkward apology grew into something neither of them knew how to define. Alexander started showing up at the bakery before it opened, bringing coffee and pretending it was for both of them, though he never drank his. Naomi pretended not to notice the way he stayed longer each time, how he offered to fix the broken light over the counter, or how he wiped flour off his shirt with the same clumsy patience he used when speaking to her. There was an unspoken rhythm between them now. No declarations, no plans. Just the quiet company of two people learning how to breathe in each other's presence. But life, as Naomi had learned long ago, never let peace last too long. One morning she unlocked the bakery door to find a crowd outside, photographers flashing cameras, people whispering her name. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then she saw the headline on someone's phone screen, Billionaire Alexander Reed's new love interest. The mystery woman from the café bet. Her heart dropped. Inside her phone buzzed non-stop calls, messages, unknown numbers, reporters demanding comments. Mariah's voice trembled from the kitchen. Naomi. What's happening? But Naomi couldn't answer. The world she'd carefully kept private was suddenly stripped bare. Moments later, Alexander appeared at the door, breathless. Naomi, don't. Her voice was sharp, brittle. You did this. I didn't leak it, he said quickly, stepping closer. Henry must have. She laughed, the sound dry and painful. Of course. Henry. Another man with too much money and too little conscience. Naomi. Do you realize what you've done? She snapped, her voice cracking. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be your story. People outside pressed closer to the glass. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Alexander turned, anger flashing in his eyes. Everyone out, he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. But the damage was done. Naomi's chest tightened. You need to go. I can fix this. You can't fix everything, she said, her voice breaking now. That's your problem, Alexander. You think life is a machine you can just reprogram when it doesn't go your way. He took a step toward her, softer this time. Then tell me what to do. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Stop trying to make me part of your redemption arc. For a long moment, neither spoke. The bakery, once filled with warmth, felt like a cage of broken glass. Finally, Naomi turned away. "Please leave." Alexander hesitated. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He obeyed. That night, Boston rain fell like a confession. Alexander stood in his penthouse lights, dimmed the city below, blurred by fog and guilt. He'd faced hostile investors, court battles, billion-dollar losses. But none of it had ever felt like this. This kind of loss burned differently. He called Henry. The line picked up laughter in the background. "Ah, Alex, saw the news." Quite the fairy tale. Alexander's voice was low, dangerous. "You leaked it." Henry's smirk was audible. "Come on, don't act surprised. You handed the media a gift. I just unwrapped it. You had no right." "Oh, I had every right." Henry interrupted, his tone tightening. "You're the one who made a fool of yourself, falling for her. You're going to drag your company down because you can't control your emotions." Alexander's knuckles whitened around the phone. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Henry said coldly. "You're losing focus, and that's bad for business." The call ended before Alexander could speak. The silence afterward was deafening. He looked out at the city again. The same skyline that once symbolized victory now felt hollow. Somewhere out there, Naomi was probably deleting messages, locking doors, wishing she'd never met him. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed had no strategy, no control, only regret. Naomi didn't open the bakery the next morning. The blinds stayed down. The world kept knocking, but she couldn't face it. She spent the day sitting by the window, watching the rain smear the city into a watercolor of gray and silver. Mariah came by with food, tried to comfort her, but Naomi barely spoke. That night, when the rain finally stopped, she stepped outside. The street was quiet. She thought of the first time she'd met him, how ridiculous it had all seemed, how angry she'd been. And now, she didn't know what to feel. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from an unknown number. "He's waiting outside." Naomi frowned, looked out the window, and froze. Alexander was there, standing in the rain-soaked street, hair dripping, coat darkened by water. No cameras this time, no audience, just him. He didn't move as she stepped outside, arms folded, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? Waiting? For what? For you to open the door." Her throat tightened. "You shouldn't be here." "Maybe not. But I needed you to know. I didn't plan for any of this." His voice was raw now, stripped of the arrogance she'd once hated. "That night in the café, I said something stupid. I was trying to prove I wasn't afraid of love, and now I can't stop proving it." Naomi's heart pounded painfully. "You think this is love? I don't know." He admitted, his words trembling. "But I know it's real. It's the only thing that's felt real in years." For a moment they just stood there, the distance between them filled with all the things they weren't ready to say. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man from headlines or rumors, but someone drowning quietly in his own mistakes. Finally, she whispered, "You should go home." He nodded slowly, then turned as if to leave. But before he did, he said softly, "If the world can't see who you are, then I'll be the one who does." Then he walked away. That night, Naomi lay awake, his words echoing in her head. She wanted to hate him, to erase every trace of him from her life. But somehow, even in her anger, she couldn't. Because beneath all the chaos and pride, she'd seen something she hadn't expected: truth. The next morning, she reopened the bakery. No reporters came, no cameras, just the quiet hum of normal life trying to find its way back. As she arranged the display, she noticed a small envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. "You said baking makes sense. Maybe love doesn't. But I'm learning." And beneath it, a single lavender flower still damp from the rain. Naomi smiled, just a little, before placing it in a glass jar beside the window. For the first time since the world had turned upside down, she didn't feel like running anymore. The quiet between them didn't last long. Silence, as Naomi would learn, had a way of filling itself with questions, rumors, and people who didn't know how to stay out of someone else's love story. Alexander had begun showing up again discreetly this time. No press, no entourage. Just a man trying to rebuild something fragile piece by piece. Sometimes he'd wait outside until closing just to walk her home. Sometimes he'd stay up late helping her fix the temperamental oven hands dusted in flour, laughing when she caught him sneaking icing off a spoon. But while the world outside seemed to quiet, another storm was beginning to gather, one that neither of them could ignore. It began with a phone call. "Alexander, we need to talk." His mother's voice carried the kind of authority that didn't ask for permission. She'd seen the tabloid headlines, the photos of her son standing outside a small bakery in a poor part of town. When he arrived at the Reed family estate that evening, he was greeted not with warmth, but with silence, sharpened into judgment. His mother sat in the grand living room, a crystal glass of wine in hand. The firelight glinted off the pearls at her neck as she turned toward him. "Is it true?" she asked coldly. "You're seeing her?" Alexander didn't hesitate. "Yes." Her expression didn't change, but her voice did, cutting and precise. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? What this is doing to our name?" He met her gaze calmly. "Our name doesn't define who I love." "Love?" She laughed bitterly. "Don't be absurd. This is about guilt or pity or rebellion. It's not love." He clenched his jaw. "You don't know her." "I don't need to," she said, setting her glass down. "I can see what she's doing. She's using you, Alexander. For attention, for comfort, for security." He took a slow breath, holding back the anger rising in his throat. "She doesn't want anything from me." "Everyone wants something," his mother said, "especially people who have nothing." Her words struck like a knife. He'd grown used to her disapproval over the years, her way of measuring people by their pedigree, not their character. But this time was different. This time it mattered. He stood abruptly. "You don't have to approve, but you'll respect her." His mother's eyes narrowed. "If you walk out that door, Alexander, you'll regret it. You're throwing away everything we built for a woman who will only drag you down." He paused just long enough to meet her gaze one last time. "If I regret anything," he said quietly, "it'll be for not fighting for her." Then he left. That night, Naomi was closing up the bakery when she heard a knock at the door. Alexander stood outside, drenched from the rain, looking like he'd walked through a war. "You're soaked," she murmured, unlocking the door. "Come in." He stepped inside, dripping onto the tiled floor, eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "What happened?" He hesitated, then sighed. "My mother." Naomi froze. She knows everything." He rubbed his face tiredly. "And she doesn't think you're good enough." Naomi felt something twist, deep inside her, familiar and cruel. "Of course she doesn't. She's wrong," he said immediately. "She doesn't understand." "She understands perfectly," Naomi interrupted softly. "She's right. I'm not from your world, Alexander. I never will be." He stepped closer, his voice fierce. "I don't care about worlds." "But your world does," she said, meeting his eyes. "And you've spent your whole life trying to control it. Do you really think you can change it for me?" "I don't want to change it," he whispered. "I want you in it." Naomi's breath caught, but she forced herself to look away. And what happens when that world starts tearing us apart? He didn't answer, because deep down, he knew his world already was. The next few days were harder than either of them expected. Naomi withdrew, afraid of becoming a headline again, afraid of being the reason his family and his empire turned on him. She stopped replying to his messages, stopped answering his calls. He showed up anyway. But every time she found a new excuse. I'm busy. I'm fine. You shouldn't be here. Until one night, he came again. This time she didn't open the door. He waited in the rain for hours, his suit soaked his hair, plastered to his forehead. The city lights flickered through the downpour, casting his silhouette against her window. Inside, Naomi sat on the couch, clutching the lavender he'd once left for her. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. When the clock struck midnight, she finally opened the door. He was still there, shivering. Alexander, she whispered. He looked up, rainwater dripping from his lashes. I told you I'd wait. She stepped forward, trembling. You'll get sick. I don't care. Her eyes filled with tears. Why are you doing this? He smiled faintly, though his voice was breaking. Because you're the only thing that makes sense anymore. She reached for his hand, the warmth of his skin shocking against the cold. You're going to ruin yourself, she whispered. Maybe he said softly, but I'd rather ruin myself for something real than keep living for nothing. Naomi's heart shattered. For a moment, she wanted to give in, to believe that love could be enough to fix what the world would never understand. But love, she knew, wasn't always enough. I can't do this, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. Not like this. He swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. Tell me what to do. She hesitated, then stepped back. Let me go. The words hit him harder than any storm, but he didn't fight them. He just stood there, breathing unsteadily as she closed the door between them. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft, relentless, cruel. By dawn, the city had quieted. Alexander was gone. Naomi opened the door and found no trace of him, except for a soaked handkerchief lying on the steps. She knelt, picking it up, her chest aching. Embroidered on the corner were the initials she'd once teased him about, AR. She pressed it to her chest, eyes burning. For the first time since meeting him, the bakery felt truly empty. And for the first time since the bet began, she realized what scared her most wasn't losing him. It was how much she already loved him. Weeks passed in silence. The tabloids found a new scandal. The cameras moved on, and Boston's winter slowly melted into a reluctant spring. But inside Naomi's world, nothing had thawed. The bakery ran as usual, orders, laughter, the smell of sugar, but the emptiness lingered like a shadow. Every time she locked the front door at night, she half expected to see him standing across the street waiting. But he didn't come back. Not until the day he did. It was late afternoon, and she was finishing the last tray of macarons when she saw him through the window. Alexander Reed, dressed simply. No driver, no cameras, no arrogance. Just him. Her heart stopped. He opened the door, and the soft chime above the frame sounded like a beginning and an ending all at once. Naomi didn't move. Why are you here? He looked exhausted but calm, his voice quiet. Because I can't stay away anymore. She turned back to the counter, pretending to focus on the tray. You shouldn't be here. We said everything we needed to. No, he said gently. You said what you thought would protect me. I never got to say what I needed to. She closed her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. Don't do this. He took a slow breath. Naomi, I know I hurt you. I know I made you a target, and I let my pride destroy the peace you built. But I'm not here to fix things anymore. I'm here because I love you." The words froze her in place. He stepped closer, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "You can walk away again. You probably should. But I need you to know what started as a mistake became the only thing in my life that ever felt honest." She looked up at him then, and for the first time she didn't see the man who'd humiliated her. She saw the man who'd stood in the rain until morning, the man who'd fought his own mother for her, the man who, despite everything, hadn't learned how to stop loving her. "Alexander." She began, her voice soft. "You can't just come here and say." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small box. Her words died on her tongue. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no flash, just pure, quiet sincerity. "Marry me," he said. She stared at him, her breath trembling. "You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. After everything. After what your family said. After what the world said." He nodded. "Especially after that." Naomi laughed softly, shaking her head. "Do you hear yourself? They'll never accept it. Then let them choke on their expectations," he said firmly. "I'm done living for them." Her chest tightened. "This isn't a movie, Alexander. Love doesn't erase the world outside that door." "I know," he said, stepping closer, "but it makes the world worth fighting through." There was a long, aching silence. The clock ticked softly behind them. And then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You don't even have a ring for me." He smiled faintly. "I don't need one." She frowned. "How can you ask someone to marry you without?" He took the tray from her hands, gently setting it aside. Then he lifted one of her flour-dusted cupcakes, scooped out a small circle from the frosting, and placed the ring right in the center. Her breath caught. "You once told me real things don't need to look perfect," he said quietly. "So this will do." Naomi stared at him, at the absurdity, the sweetness, the unbelievable tenderness of it all, and for the first time since everything fell apart, she laughed. Really laughed. "God, you're impossible," she said, shaking her head through tears. He smiled, eyes soft. "That's not a no." She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "I don't know if I can survive the chaos again." "I'll take the chaos," he whispered, reaching for her hand, "as long as it ends with you." Her fingers trembled in his. Her heart said yes long before her lips did. And just like that, the bet that started in arrogance became a vow sealed in humility. The news exploded within hours. Alexander Reed engaged to the cafe woman. The world laughed again, headlines dripping with disbelief. Some called it a PR stunt, others a phase. But Alexander ignored them all. The wedding was held in a small stone chapel at the edge of the city. No press, no designer labels, no endless guest list. Just a few close friends and the soft hum of a piano echoing through the walls. Naomi wore a simple ivory dress, one she'd sewn herself. The lace didn't fit perfectly, and the hem was uneven, but Alexander thought she'd never looked more breathtaking. When she walked down the aisle, his heart stilled. For once, time didn't move. As the vows began, the minister spoke gently. "Marriage is not built on perfection, but on forgiveness." Alexander turned to her, his voice low but clear. "The first time I saw you, I thought you were a test of my pride. Now I know you were the answer to it." Naomi's eyes glistened as she whispered back, "And the first time I saw you, I thought you were everything I despised. Now, you're everything I never knew I needed." When the ceremony ended, they didn't have champagne or luxury cars waiting. They walked out of the chapel hand in hand, the cool air brushing against them, laughter echoing softly in the distance. A group of children, outside neighbors from Naomi's block, had gathered by the steps, holding paper flowers they'd made. One of them shouted, "Are you really married?" Mr. Alexander knelt smiling. "You bet I am." The kids giggled, and one threw a handful of confetti, made from torn cupcake wrappers, into the air. Naomi laughed, tears blurring her vision as she looked at him. This man who'd gone from stranger to storm to home. He turned to her, voice barely above a whisper. "Still think this isn't a movie?" She smiled, touching his face. "No," she murmured. "It's better." That night, they danced alone in the dim light of the bakery, surrounded by the smell of sugar and coffee. There was no music, just the sound of rain beginning to fall outside, the same rain that had once separated them, now blessing what they'd built. Alexander held her close, whispering against her hair. "You realize if Henry could see me now, he'd demand his 5%. Naomi laughed softly. "Then let him have it. You've already won the only bet that matters." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "And what's that?" She smiled, brushing a tear from his cheek. "You bet on love, and this time, it didn't lose." The world moved on, but love, as Naomi would learn, didn't always stay easy once the headlines faded. Their wedding, mocked by tabloids, ignored by high society, soon became yesterday's news. Life returned to its quieter rhythm, one where mornings smelled like fresh coffee, and late nights were spent with tired laughter and tangled fingers. For a while, everything felt soft, like a dream they were both afraid to wake from. But reality, patient and merciless, waited for its moment. It began the year their first child was born. The delivery was long, exhausting, and nearly took everything out of her. Alexander was there through it all, hands shaking, voice trembling, begging her to breathe, to hold on. When their baby finally cried, so did he. It was the sound that broke him open completely. For weeks after, he stayed home learning how to swaddle, how to feed, how to exist without board meetings or flashing cameras. But soon the calls began again. The company needed him. The investors were restless. Henry, once his closest friend, had resurfaced, whispering into the board's ears, sowing doubt. By the time their baby turned 6 months old, Alexander was being pulled in two directions: the world he'd fought to leave and the love he couldn't bear to lose. Naomi saw it before he did, the way he'd stare at his phone between feedings, the way he'd flinch every time the word "Reed Technologies" appeared on the news. "You can go," she told him one night, cradling the baby against her shoulder. He looked up, startled. "Go where? To work," she said quietly. "You don't have to choose between us." He frowned. "It's not about choosing." "Then what is it about?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "It's about keeping everything together." But the truth was, everything was already starting to slip. Months later, the first cracks appeared. Henry had orchestrated a quiet coup within the board, leveraging the media scandal and the public's fascination with Alexander's controversial marriage. He confronted Henry privately, jaw tight, voice low. "You're trying to take what's mine." Henry smirked. "I'm trying to save the company from you. You've gone soft, Alex. You used to be ruthless. Now you're sentimental. It's bad for business." Alexander's voice was sharp. "You mean bad for your ego?" "Call it what you want," Henry said. "You built a kingdom on logic and control. Now you're throwing it away for love stories and cupcakes." Alexander didn't flinch, but the words cut deep. When he got home that night, Naomi was waiting. She could see it in his eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet storm he refused to name. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Henry," he said simply, He wants to destroy everything. Naomi's heart clenched. Because of me, no. He said, his voice heavy. Because of what I've become since you. She reached for his hand. Then maybe what you've become is exactly who you were supposed to be. He looked at her, really looked, and for a moment the weight on his shoulders eased. But not even love could stop the noise. The press wouldn't let go of her past. Old photos, cruel comparisons, twisted headlines, all resurfaced. Naomi tried to ignore them at first, but the whispers found their way into everything. At the grocery store, at the park, even at the bakery. People stared longer than before. Some smiled too sweetly. Others looked away. Then came the anonymous messages, emails, filled with poison. He'll leave you. He always will. People like you don't get happy endings. She didn't tell Alexander at first. He had enough to carry. But at night, when the baby slept, she'd sit in the dark scrolling through those words until they blurred into tears. Eventually, she couldn't hide it. One morning, he found her on the kitchen floor, shaking her phone screen, glowing with another hateful message. He took the phone, read the words, then gently knelt in front of her. Don't let them touch what they don't understand. Her eyes filled. They're right. I don't belong in your world. He cupped her face, voice trembling. Then I'll leave it. Naomi's tears broke free. You can't just walk away from everything you built. He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb along her cheek. You're the only thing I ever built that matters. Still, the world had its way of testing promises. When their child turned 2, Naomi began to withdraw again. The postpartum shadows she thought she'd outrun came back quietly, sleepless nights, self-doubt, the constant fear of not being enough. Alexander tried to help. He hired doctors, therapists, even took months off work to stay by her side. But what she needed wasn't fixing. She needed understanding. One night, she finally spoke the truth she'd been afraid to voice. I hate that people look at me and see charity. He froze. Charity? Yes. She turned away. Like I'm some project you're trying to prove the world wrong about. Naomi. I know, she said, cutting him off softly. You don't mean to. But sometimes when you defend me so fiercely, it feels like you're protecting an image, not a person. He said nothing for a long time. Then he reached out, fingers brushing hers. Then let me try again. Not as your defender, as your husband. Her eyes softened. And if I fail you? He smiled sadly. Then I'll fail with you. She laughed through her tears. That's not very CEO of you. I'm off duty, he murmured. Months later, she reopened Sweet Crumbs under a new name, Sweet Soul. The first day there were no reporters, no investors, no fanfare, just the smell of cinnamon, the laughter of a toddler playing in the corner, and Alexander sitting at the counter sipping his coffee. The shop filled slowly, not with customers chasing gossip, but with people who came for warmth, for the quiet message printed above the counter. Beauty isn't measured by perfection, it's baked into the soul. The phrase went viral within weeks. Articles called her the woman who made imperfection beautiful. But Naomi didn't care about that. For once, the attention didn't hurt, it healed. One evening after closing, she found Alexander sitting by the window, their child asleep in his arms. He looked up at her and smiled. Do you realize, he said softly, they're calling you an inspiration now? Naomi smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. I'd rather just be someone who made it through. He kissed her hand gently. You didn't just make it through. You made me better along the way. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and for the first time in a long while, their world felt steady, not perfect, but whole. Because love, they'd learned, didn't stay beautiful by being easy. It stayed beautiful because even when it cracked, it refused to break. 10 years. It had been 10 years since that foolish bet in the cafe, 10 years since a man with too much pride and a woman with too much heart collided in the unlikeliest way. The world had changed around them. Empires rose, headlines faded, and the city that once sneered at them had learned to look twice, not because of wealth or scandal, but because of what they had built together. Their home was noisy now, alive with the laughter of 6 children, each one a reflection of something they once thought impossible. The oldest had Alexander's sharp eyes and Naomi's quiet stubbornness. The twins carried her smile. The youngest 2 had his uncanny calm, the kind that could silence chaos with a glance. Every morning began the same way, the smell of pancakes, the squeal of a child chasing another through the hallway, and Alexander in the kitchen still terrible at making coffee despite years of trying. Naomi would always appear behind him, shaking her head, taking the pot from his hand. "Still too strong," she'd mutter. "Still too beautiful," he'd reply, and she'd roll her eyes every time. They lived in moments now, not headlines. But even in peace, the past had a way of echoing softly, like an old song playing from another room. One afternoon, as the rain tapped gently against the window panes, Naomi sat on the porch watching their children build a tower of wooden blocks. Alexander joined her, 2 mugs in hand. "Remember when you said love wasn't a movie?" he asked with a faint smile. "I still believe that," she said, leaning back. "Movies end when the couple kisses. Real life begins after." He laughed quietly. "And would you still choose this version of real life? The messy one with crayons on the walls and jelly on my shirt?" She looked at him, her smile softening. "Every time." He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, earned. Then, almost as if the universe wanted to test their calm, one of the children's cries pierced through the peace. Naomi sighed, already halfway to her feet, but Alexander caught her wrist. "I've got it," he said, standing. "You've done enough." She smiled. "You sure you can handle 6? He grinned. "I handled you." Her laughter followed him inside, light and genuine. That evening, after the house had finally gone quiet, Naomi wandered into Alexander's study. Papers lay scattered across his desk, financial reports, letters. But among them was something else. A photograph. It was the old cafe, the one where it all began. It looked smaller now, older, its sign faded but familiar. Beneath it, scrawled in his handwriting, were 5 words, "Where I found my forever." She picked it up gently. "You kept this." He looked up from the couch, smiling faintly. "I bought it." She blinked. "You what?" "I bought the cafe," he said simply. "It's been empty for years. I thought maybe we could turn it into something new." She tilted her head. "Like what? A space for people who think they're too different to fall in love," he said softly. "A place to remind them that impossible things happen every day." Naomi felt her chest tighten. "You're serious?" He stood, walking toward her, eyes steady. "The world once laughed at us. Let them come back and see what love actually built." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slipped her arms around him, resting her cheek against his chest. "You never stop trying to surprise me." He smiled into her hair. "It's the only thing that still scares me. What happens if I ever stop?" Months later, Café Verona reopened. But it wasn't the same cafe that once held the sound of laughter at her expense. Now it was a warm space filled with light shelves of books about resilience and walls lined with black and white photos of couples from all walks of life, each one with a handwritten caption beneath. "This is what love looks like." On opening day, Naomi stood behind the counter, wearing an apron dusted with flour while Alexander served coffee like an awkward barista who'd never learned the trade. Their children ran through the cafe giggling, helping customers choose pastries. An older woman approached the counter smiling softly. "I read about you 2 years ago. People called your story crazy." Naomi smiled, handing her a cup. They weren't wrong. "And now?" the woman asked. "Now," Naomi said, glancing at Alexander, "we call it faith." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, before walking away. Alexander leaned close, whispering, "You've gotten good at this public speaking thing." Naomi nudged him playfully. "I learned from the best." He arched an eyebrow. "Henry." She shot him a look so sharp he burst out laughing. It was a sound that still turned her chest warm, even after all the years. Later that night, after the last customer left, they sat alone at one of the tables, the lights dimmed, the air smelling of coffee and rain. Alexander traced the rim of his cup. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't walked into that cafe?" Naomi smiled. "You'd still be unbearable." He chuckled softly, then grew quiet. "Sometimes I wonder if fate knew what it was doing or if it just got lucky." "Maybe both," she said. "Maybe fate handed you the wrong woman to teach you what the right kind of love looks like." He looked at her for a long time, then reached out his hand, finding hers on the table. "No," he said quietly. "Fate handed me exactly who I needed." The rain outside grew heavier, a steady hum against the windows. She leaned her head against his shoulder, their fingers still intertwined. "6 kids," she murmured. "Who would have thought?" "Not me," he admitted. "I thought I wasn't built for love. Turns out I just needed the right teacher." She smiled, eyes closing. "And what did she teach you?" He kissed the top of her head. "That love doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up, Rex. Everything you thought you knew, and somehow makes it better." For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe around them felt alive with ghosts, the laughter of the past, the promise of tomorrow. Naomi finally whispered, "You realize, you just turned our life into a fairy tale ending." He smiled. "No," he said softly. "Fairy tales end. Ours keeps going." Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle, the city lights shimmering through the glass. Inside, a man who once didn't believe in love, and a woman who once stopped believing in herself, sat quietly watching their reflection in the dark window. Older, gentler, still, hand in hand. And as their children's laughter echoed faintly from the next room, Alexander turned to her, his voice barely a breath. "I bet," he said, smiling, "you're still the best thing I ever won." Naomi laughed, eyes glistening. "That's one bet," she whispered, "you'll never lose." And in that small glowing cafe, once the scene of a foolish wager, their love weathered, but unbroken, went on shining quietly, endlessly, against the world. The night of the awards was colder than usual, the kind of crisp Boston evening, where the stars hung low enough to almost touch. Naomi stood backstage, adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Alexander, on their 5th anniversary, engraved with the words, "My forever bet." She still teased him about it, but tonight, as her name echoed through the grand hall, she found herself clutching it for courage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced the recipient of this year's Inspiration of the Year award, Naomi Reed. Applause filled the room, thunderous and warm. Naomi froze for a heartbeat, the lights blinding the crowd endless. Then she saw him. Alexander was in the front row, sitting perfectly still among rows of suited men and glittering gowns. But his eyes, calm, steady, proud, were locked on her. Their children sat beside him, whispering to each other in excitement, their youngest waving a handmade sign that said, Go, Mom, Naomi smiled through tears as she stepped onto the stage. The applause softened. The microphone waited. For once, she wasn't nervous, because every moment that led her here, every heartbreak and miracle, had already been lived. She took a slow breath. 10 years ago, she began softly, I walked into a cafe to buy a cup of coffee, and accidentally changed my life. The audience chuckled. She smiled too, glancing briefly toward Alexander. Back then, I thought the world measured worth by perfection, by how you looked, what you owned, who approved of you. But someone, a very stubborn man. She paused as laughter rippled through the crowd. Taught me that love doesn't need approval. It just needs courage. Her voice softened. We all have something imperfect about us, the way we look, the way we dream, the way we love. But sometimes, those imperfections are the doorway to everything beautiful. The hall fell silent, every eye drawn to the quiet conviction in her tone. I didn't win tonight because I'm perfect, she finished. I won because I stopped trying to be. The applause rose again, standing now, and when she looked down, Alexander wasn't clapping. He was smiling, that same quiet smile he'd worn the first time he told her, I'll marry you, the one that still made her heart ache in the best way. Later that evening, when the cameras were gone and the lights had dimmed, they returned home. Their house was buzzing, kids still awake jumping on couches, pretending to give their own speeches. Thank you to my husband for making pancakes every Sunday, their oldest announced, dramatically holding a spoon like a microphone. Alexander groaned. That's the last time I teach you humor. Naomi laughed until her sides hurt. The children crowded around her, touching the golden trophy with sticky fingers. It's so shiny, Mom, one of them said. Not as shiny as your dad's ego, she teased. Alexander looked at her from across the room, mock offended. Excuse me, Mrs. Reed, I believe I've earned at least partial credit for tonight's speech. Naomi arched a brow. Oh, really? Which part? The stubborn man, he said, smirking. Clearly me. She rolled her eyes but smiled, walking toward him. You're right, she whispered. It was you. He pretended to straighten his tie, pleased. Finally. Then she leaned in closer. But you also taught me something else. What's that? She smiled. That love is the only bet worth losing, because either way you win. His laugh was soft, low, the kind that still made her weak after all these years. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close as the children danced around them. Weeks later, they returned to Café Verona, now their own cafe reborn alive. It had become something magical, a haven for stories like theirs. Couples came to celebrate anniversaries, propose, reconcile, or just sit quietly drinking coffee that wasn't perfect, but always made with heart. Naomi walked through the door, holding 2 cups of latte. Alexander was sitting by the window, reading a newspaper, pretending not to notice her. Your coffee, Mr. Reed, she said, placing it down. He looked up, smirking. Still trying to prove you make it better. She grinned. No, I already won that argument years ago. They sat together, sipping quietly as the sun poured through the glass. Outside, their children ran through the garden behind the cafe, chasing each other among the roses Alexander had planted for her last spring. 6 of them, she said softly, shaking her head. Can you believe it? He smiled faintly. Sometimes I think about that night at the cafe, the one that started all this. If I'd walked away instead of standing up. She reached across the table, taking his hand. You wouldn't have. He looked at her, his voice quieter now. You changed everything I believed about love. Naomi's smile trembled. No, Alexander. You changed everything I believed about myself. For a moment the world fell away. just the two of them. No titles, no crowds, no noise. Then she said softly, "Do you ever think we made it through too much to be this happy?" He laughed. "No such thing. We earned this." That night, after closing the cafe, they walked along the quiet street hand in hand. The city glowed, faintly reflected in puddles from the afternoon rain. Alexander stopped in front of the same spot where it had all begun, the window, where he'd first seen her clutching that torn paper bag, completely unaware of how much she was about to change his life. "Do you remember that day?" he asked. Naomi smiled. "I remember wanting to throw my coffee at you." He laughed, his voice soft in the cool air. "You still can. I'd let you." She shook her head, stepping closer. "No, I think I'll keep you." He kissed her. Then, not like the first time, not desperate or apologetic, but tender, familiar, infinite. When they pulled apart, the world was silent, except for the hum of the city and the faint sound of their children's laughter echoing from home. Naomi looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Do you realize what you did all those years ago?" He raised a brow. "Besides, almost ruined my life." She smiled. "You gave it meaning." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering, "Then it was worth every risk." She leaned into his chest, breathing him in the warmth, the calm, the certainty of a man who had once bet on pride and found love instead. And as the night wrapped around them, the lights from Café Verona glowed behind, like a heartbeat, steady, unshakable, real. Somewhere in the quiet rhythm of their joined hands, the laughter of 6 children, and the smell of rain and roasted coffee, they knew they had found it, the kind of happiness that didn't need to be loud or perfect. It just needed to last. And it did. Oma stories aren't just told, they're felt. Because love isn't always perfect, but when it's real, it changes everything. If this story touched your heart, stay with us for every tear, every promise, every second chance that reminds us true love still exists. Subscribe, share, and let your heart believe again. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to love you just as deeply.